What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Days Gone. Now, a few things to get out of the way right off the bat here. I like to review games after 100% to set me apart from other reviewers on YouTube, as well as just to lend myself some credibility. If you're curious what all that actually entails and you go to my channel and you're not subscribed, the first video you're going to see is a video explaining all of it to you. And while it includes the achievements, they're hardly the only thing involved. But that said, my Steam profile is public and linked in the description below. Also, we are specifically on the Steam version of Days Gone. Now, Days Gone originally released for PlayStation as an exclusive in 2019, and then it came to Steam in 2021. The game was developed by Bend Studio, and the game itself has a bit of a contentious discussion around it and how well it's sold, etc. You'll see this pop up in journalism sometimes, and just people talking about how the game sold millions but was considered a disappointment, etc. But with no further ado, let's actually fully jump into this thing. So I like to talk about the setup for the story, so as not to actually spoil anything. But the general setup for Days Gone is that the end of the world is happening, or has happened more specifically. You start out in a bit of a flashback, but time quickly fast forwards to 2 years later, where the zombie apocalypse, so to speak, has happened. Now, these aren't technically zombies. If you want to get really specific, they're just mutated human beings, but they are very much so alive. But basically your standard virus outbreak led to zombie plague. Now, you yourself play as a biker named Deacon St. John. And the main thing to know about the story here is that while you will eventually get answers for questions like, where did this virus come from? How widespread is it? All of those answers will come, but the story is actually really revolving around the personal story of Deacon St. John. And as such, because the story centers so heavily on him, if you don't like Deacon St. John, you're probably not going to like the story, which is a shame because in my opinion, the story is really the best thing this game has going for it. Because what sets this apart from a lot of other zombie-style games is that the zombies are more of a backdrop. And while yes, they're important, obviously, they're really not the biggest thing going on. A lot of the story actually revolves around the interpersonal connections between everybody involved, and less so about the actual zombies. So let's talk difficulty a little bit. So difficulty varies from easy to survival 2. Now, Survival 2 was added later, post-release I mean, and whereas easy, and I think even normal actually, has a bit of aim assist and the time to kill zombies and stuff is a little shorter, survival mode actually sees you losing things like your UI for the most part, and of course losing the aim assist, etc. So on Survival 2, there's no amount of aim assist, and you only see your UI when you are using your survival sense, which is kind of like your standard eagle vision almost from, say, like Assassin's Creed. Basically, it just lets you highlight things on the map to go look at. But in survival mode, it has the extra benefit of actually showing your UI while you have it active. And I would say survival and survival 2 are probably pretty rough for a first playthrough, but another feature of the difficulty is the New Game Plus mode. So after you beat the game, you can then import all of your upgrades and skills, etc. to a New Game Plus mode. And New Game Plus lets you change the difficulty for that playthrough. So Survival 2 on a new playthrough really isn't that difficult. Now, in terms of progression that you would actually bring over with you for New Game Plus, for instance, it's primarily separated into, I would say, 3 categories. There's the skills, so as you play the game, you will actually be leveling up, per se, which will give you skill points, which you can then spend on one of 45 skills, divided into sets of 15 each for melee, ranged, and survival. Now, you can actually get all of these perks, and if you do a very thorough run of the game, you will easily get them all, actually, with some room to spare. And these do basically what you think they would do. They make your range or melee combat easier, and just, in general, make the game easier as you pick up these perks, and is your main mode of progression. Then we have our equipment progression. So out in the world, you're going to find camps, which we'll talk about here in a bit, but by doing jobs and missions for those camps, you increase your trust status, and increasing your trust status increases the amount of things you can buy from the camp merchant, which will then let you buy and upgrade your gear, which means things like better weapons, suppressors, throwables, traps, etc. Most camps also have a mechanic, which will also allow you to upgrade your motorcycle, which is kind of the third bit of progression, as your motorcycle is your primary mode of traveling the world map. And your bike starts off pretty terrible, but by the end you can drive basically everywhere on one tank of gas. It lasts a lot longer, it takes more to get damaged, etc. But with all of that said, let's talk a bit about the world building of this game. So the first thing I want to say about the world is that it's gorgeous, honestly. The game itself is very pretty to look at. It runs very, very smoothly. And on a technical standpoint, the world is very good in that regard. Like, FPS is solid, didn't really have any trouble at all. And again, the game is just really pretty. Now, for the rest of the world building section, I'm going to divide this up into the more lore and setting, so to speak, and then the actual mechanics of the world building, because I think both are kind of important. For starters, as I mentioned, basically everybody rides motorcycles now. This is for a variety of reasons, but primarily because there are hordes of the freaks or the zombies that basically march up and down the highway and in the major cities, which means being on the main roads is very dangerous. So most people have adopted to living off-road, which involves things like dirt bikes, motorcycles, basically any off-road vehicle. Now, the people that are still around have kind of organized into small camps of survivors, which I also mentioned. Now, these are pretty much what you would expect in a post-apocalypse. They're little survivalist camps. Everyone is expected to work in order to earn their keep and their food, frankly. Some of them are trying to farm, some of them put more of an emphasis on hunting, and the flavor of each camp kind of varies depending on where you go. But the point is, there is a little bit of organization happening with the survivors that are still out here, because there are people around. As I mentioned, the story is very much so about the people that are left in this universe, which brings us to the point that I mentioned a bit ago, which is that the zombies are not like the big primary thing happening. They are a threat, yes, but they're primarily a threat in their horde form. Individually, most of the zombies are very weak. In fact, headshots will kill most enemies until you get to the late game, where human enemies are wearing armor and some of the larger freaks don't go down when you hit them with just one shot to the head. But most of them do just die to headshots. So individually, these things aren't very dangerous. It's only when they group up and form what are called hordes that they become an issue. Because as the game will slowly unravel and tell you, this is actually a worldwide thing. This happened everywhere. I won't get into the specifics because spoilers, but basically the vast majority of the human population has been turned into these freaks. So while the freaks are basically just mindless animals for the most part, there's really just not enough humanity left to fight them. But because they are, again, fairly mindless, an organized human force can easily clear these things out. It's just a matter of getting the resources to do so, which is presented as the primary obstacle, in that regard anyway. So now that I've kind of talked about the more conceptual stuff, let's talk about how this actually works in practice. And unfortunately, this is where it kind of falls apart a bit. In practice, the world of Days Gone is pretty boring, honestly. In terms of things being a threat, as I just mentioned, unless you stumble upon a horde, which there are about 40 of them in-game, which you can fight, beyond that, the zombies really just aren't a threat. And the hordes are in very specific locations and are pretty easily avoided, until you're ready to actually fight them. And while the main quest has a lot of variations to it, about like the things you'll be doing and how you'll approach some stuff, unfortunately, the side missions are very run-of-the-mill. The side missions are basically go rescue this person, go clear out this group of bandits, or go track down this specific person. And every side mission is basically one of those three things. And that gets repetitive and boring pretty quickly. Moreover, how you actually explore the map and stuff is very Ubisoft, which I realize isn't who made this, obviously, but in order to explore the map, basically what you'll do is you'll track down ambush camps, which are basically the Days Gone equivalent of Ubisoft towers, where you'll go in, you'll clear out the ambush camp, you'll find their bunker, which contains a map, which marks a bunch of locations on your map, and then you'll go track them down. And this is how you'll find all of the important collectibles. And ultimately, my opinion about the world building in particular is that while it has some cool ideas, it ultimately sticks to that very tried and true traditional AAA open world RPG. And really the only unique thing about it in that regard is the hordes, which we're about to talk about for the combat section. Now, as I mentioned, probably the most important thing to know about combat is that headshots will kill most things instantly. Now, late game, you will run into some enemies that is not true for, such as stronger zombies who can't be dropped that way, or again, human enemies wearing armor. Some of the human enemies wearing the armor actually have other methods of also one-shotting them, which is important to remember. But a lot of the later game larger freaks just have to be filled full of lead, basically. But beyond that, there's a lot of options in terms of the weapons available to you. And truth be told, mechanically speaking, the combat is good, but it's very run-of-the-mill. Like if you've ever played any kind of shooter, either third person or first person, you basically get the gist of what this is because it functions pretty much the same. Now there is a bit of melee combat with weapons you can pick up and stuff, and while I really wouldn't call any of it bad, it's just very standard, I guess would be the word for it. Outside of this one thing, and that is of course the Hordes. Now the Hordes are, I would say, truly unique to Days Gone, but fighting them also becomes fairly standard after a while. While these things are initially pretty intimidating, the story, specifically actually the main story, really sets you up to fight Hordes at the end of it via consumables and things which just make it easier, like a napalm Molotov, various types of traps that you can set up and then trigger the Horde to run through, which will kill tons of them all at once. So while they start off very intimidating at first, by the end game you are very well equipped to handle even the largest Hordes, and in fact, the largest Horde in the game is actually required to be dealt with per the main story. But here's the thing, even if you didn't have all of these methods available to you, Hordes will actually not chase you endlessly. They have a bit of a leashed area, if you will, and if you drag them out of that, they will start to slowly trickle back to the area they're supposed to be in and stop chasing you, which allows you to turn around and just take pot shots at them, which I realize there's probably some technical reason for this, but I honestly just wish that they would chase you endlessly if you aggroed them, which would have made it a more fun experience and less prone to cheese, in my opinion. Now, let's talk a little bit about the DLC. Now, a good chunk of the DLC I've actually already mentioned, which was the Survival and the New Game Plus modes. Now there is a bit more of DLC called Challenges. I did not like the challenges, thought they were kind of dumb and unrelated to most of the game, to be honest. But from the main menu or just the settings menu in the main game, you can activate the Challenge menu, which is a separate game mode that sees you running through various challenges that are themed a little bit, but basically double down on the combat of the game primarily. There's a few motorcycle, like race type ones that are a little more fun. And I would say the only good thing that I liked about the challenges is that the rewards for doing them actually carry over to the main game a little bit. So there are 12 challenges, and each challenge has a patch associated with it. And there are 3 levels of each patch: bronze, silver, and gold. So getting a gold medal on a challenge gives you the equivalent gold patch for that challenge. And each level of a patch increases what that patch does for you in the main game. So say a patch increases your medkit efficiency, basically. Well, once you've earned that in challenges and you play the main game, Deacon will actually have that new patch on his biker jacket, plus you get the extra benefit from that patch in the main game, which is nice and definitely pretty helpful for a survival mode. But just the act of playing these challenges is just not a lot of fun, in my opinion, and kind of doubles down on some of the most annoying mechanics in the game, which is like, oh, fight off this horde, but also you have to do it with these specific weapons type stuff. And overall, I just didn't find it very fun. I'm sure it's some people's cup of tea, but it wasn't for me. And honestly, my feelings on challenges are that is a day of my life I'll never get back. Now let's talk positives, negatives, and then wrap this thing up. Positives for me, the story is really good if you like Deacon as a character. If you don't like Deacon as a character, you're probably not going to like the story, but I enjoyed the story quite a bit. It has a couple weak moments here and there, and one thing I really don't think they ever explained, at least if they did, I guess I missed it. They never explain why the people that are alive now are apparently immune to the virus, which I guess is just the explanation in and of itself. The people alive are just immune to the virus. But the thing that is mutating people into the freaks, it is an incredibly fast-acting virus. Like, we're talking within the span of a day or two, you will turn into one of these things. However, everyone in game pretty much is up close and personal with these freaks all the time, and they are apparently not catching this virus, which again I really don't think was ever explained anywhere. So I'm guessing they just want you to assume that the people left are immune to it. But beyond that, the horde mechanic I thought was really cool, or at least a cool idea. As I mentioned, I wish they wouldn't leash the hordes to one specific area once you've aggroed them, just to make it a bit more interesting, but I suppose they probably don't want you leading a horde back to the camps or something. But overall, the horde mechanic is cool and pretty unique. Honestly, it was a pretty intense experience the first couple times you run into these things. Beyond that, the world itself is absolutely gorgeous, and on a technical level, it runs very well. Now, negatives for me are the just very traditional AAA open world. In that regard, this game took 0 risks. Combine that with the very run-of-the-mill side missions, and you're left with, in my opinion, a great story in a bland world. Which is why my overall conclusion for this game is that while it's a very cool experience to run through, and I can see why people do love this game so much, for me personally, I would say buy it on sale. It's normally $50, at least on Steam. I think I picked it up for $30 during a sale, which is what I would say is probably more about what it's worth. As for most people, a run through the main story is probably going to be about 30 or so hours. And even in that 30 hours, there's a ton of repetitive content. But again, yeah, my overall conclusion is pretty cool story in an unfortunately pretty bland open world. There you guys go. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching, especially if you're listening to this message right now. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.